Let's start with Jürgen Klopp and Germany. Jürgen Klopp, the former Liverpool manager, of course, confirmed as the head coach of the national team at the end of last week, and starting his tenure with maybe one of the most punchy press conferences I've heard in a long, long time, Ian. Just for listeners who maybe didn't see the stories that we ran on the Times website, just tell them a little bit about what he said and perhaps why he said it.
He was quite combative in some ways. He focused on, I guess the exposure that this job brings, which is possibly bigger exposure than either of his or any of his previous jobs, albeit that they were with very big clubs. And he sort of said to the media, you respect my privacy. Otherwise that will drive me away, which was, getting the first blow in early, I suppose. There is a lot of positive vibes towards him at this stage because he's, I guess, possibly the best German coach in work at the moment. And it's quite a competitive field, but in terms of experience, trophies, etc., and the obvious capacity to galvanize teams, which is what Germany needs. It was a great Klopp press conference overall. There was the little bit of aggression, but there was also, some jokes, some Mr. Motivator stuff, which is what they're looking for primarily. And there was some, quite funny asides. And there was a sort of gravitas as well, respecting how big a job this is, how big a job this seems to him.
Yeah, absolutely. He looks well as well, doesn't he? He looks like a bloke who's had a year out of football. I thought that at the World Cup when you saw him on the German television networks. I thought this guy looks like he's pumped and ready to get back into things, which you could tell from that press conference. Just thinking about his standing in the German game, is it as popular amongst German football fans as he is here? Because part of that punchy press conference, as you say, stems from him being in such a position of strength, I feel. This guy is probably one of the most popular, universally well-liked managers in the European game. I would argue even maybe more than Pep Guardiola, who sometimes suffers from the sneering of the eye rolling, Pep Guardiola again, Everyone seems to love Klopp. Do they love him in Germany?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you can think of small reservations. Occasionally, there's a little bit of sniping that he's a bit too eager to take on commercial endorsements and things. But you could apply that to quite a lot of very successful football people. There is obviously a thing in his past when he was at Borussia Dortmund. He had to be a little bit anti-Bayern. It's a necessary part of being a Dortmund manager, particularly a successful Dortmund manager as he was, and sniping at Bayern occasionally. So I think there are probably some absolute die-hard Bayern fans who are skeptical about Klopp. But yeah, he's hugely admired and he's very charismatic. And of course he has a profile beyond the touchline because he has been very, very good on the media. And in fact, he was almost more famous as a media analyst when he was a young manager than he was as a young manager. So he's got all that. And I think there's a lot of benevolent thoughts towards Klopp in Germany.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think about the task that he's got at hand? We saw them at the World Cup. Slightly underwhelming after that big win in that opening game, admittedly, against Curacao. They've got lots of talented players in there. They've also got a couple of players who are perhaps towards the end of their time at international level. Is this going to be an easy job for him heading into the Euros? I sense maybe not.
No, and he was honest about that. I think he said something to the effect of, would we go out and beat France tomorrow? Probably not. So there is a building job to do. He made reference to the age group teams who have been quite successful, certainly at under 17 level 2 or 3 years ago. So he can see a talent pool coming to the surface. But they have underachieved terribly in World Cup terms. This was their best World Cup for the last 3. And it wasn't a good World Cup. So, he's starting from a low base, which can sometimes be an advantage. Will they be better in the next World Cup than they have been in the previous 3? They better be. Otherwise I think, he's going to have some questions to answer. But you would have to say on paper and with a considerable Bayern base, there's plenty to be positive about. The interesting thing as with a lot of sort of high caliber international manager appointments, is whether he can deal with the stop-start nature of it, because, he's always been a very controlling club coach. So that's the challenge for both parties, really.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating to see how Jürgen Klopp goes in his early months in charge of Germany.